The last year has been a very sad one for a lot of major ministries, churches, mega churches, charities across the country. It seems like almost every week another prominent minister resigns. Sometimes we don't find out the reason why they resigned. But in most cases, the resignation happens because the minister did something that became public. They did something wrong that other people found out about. This past week, a minister resigned when he was arrested for driving under the influence. The head of a Christian charity was forced to step down when it turned out he was using donated funds for his personal use. These included vacations for his family and birthday parties for his children. Another minister is facing backlash after building a multi-million-dollar home for himself. Many cases have involved affairs. Still another ongoing case involves a scheme to get a minister's book onto the New York Times bestseller list by using church funds to buy up thousands of copies of the book he had just written. Though most of the cases involve men, there are a few women who've also been caught up in the controversy and have had to resign. Male or female, it doesn't matter. In almost every case, these are good people. They lead churches and charities that have changed the lives of literally millions. Through spiritual leadership and financial gifts, these leaders have grown churches from a basement that just had a few dozen people to thousands worshiping on Sundays. Charities grew from a few $1,000s in donations to millions brought in every year. There's a common thread among all of these people, and it isn't simply that they are in the ministry, because this is something that happens in all walks of life. It happens in the business world. Think Enron. Think the Adelphia cable scandal. It happens in the media world when reporters create fictional stories they claim are fact. It happens in the sports world. Look at what happened to Joe Paterno, what's happening in the NFL right now. It happens in politics. It happens a lot in politics. Former President Richard Nixon will never be mentioned without the word Watergate following close behind. And yet many historians today believe without Watergate, he might have been considered one of our greatest presidents. He ended the Vietnam War. He began historic diplomatic work with China, the Middle East, and Latin America. But Watergate will always hang around his name. You can't say Richard Nixon without saying Watergate. Strong people who achieve greatness and lose it all. Instead of leaving a legacy of goodness or greatness, they slink off into the history books in shame. Their statues are removed, everything they did is now questioned, and they can never escape the stain of their mistakes, even in death. With a large number of ministers stepping down in shame over the last year, and especially just the last few months, it must be asked, what's going on? What happened? What went wrong? And why does it keep on happening? I think it's actually something called the Samson Sickness. Of course, I just made that up, but that's what I'm going to call it. I think you'll understand as we take a look at the life of Samson over the next 4 weeks. The story of Samson can be found in the Old Testament book of Judges. And if you're looking for it, chapters 13 through 16 give you the whole picture of Samson beginning to end. Today we begin with why Samson was such an important character in the Bible. Judges chapter 13 builds a great foundation to understand the greatness that was expected of Samson. Everybody thought Samson was going to be the greatest of all, that he would rival King David in terms of his power and what he was going to be able to do because of what happened in Judges 13. But things went horribly wrong. And in the end, it is a great lesson to each of us in our own lives. We may not be the head of a company, a pastor of a church, or the leader of a charity, but we will all face spiritual battles that can bring us down. We can all come down with the Samson sickness. It doesn't matter who you are. Now first, I want to make it clear that I believe Samson was a real person. I believe he existed and that the biblical account that we have in Judges is an accurate history of his life. For many years, scholars have disputed the idea that Samson was real. But then in 2012, something amazing happened. Archaeologists in Tel Aviv discovered a round seal that featured the picture of a lion and a man. That seal was dated to 12 centuries before Christ. It was found in the area where Samson was believed to have lived. Now, this isn't proof in and of itself that Samson was a real person. Instead, though, it shows that this story was already being told of a hero who fought a lion. And as we read through Samson over the next 4 weeks, we're going to cover that story of what happened when he fought the lion. It's another of the many physical proofs that the history of the Bible is truly the history of the world. Sometimes we like to pass it off, and I hear so often, oh, the Bible's just a myth. It's not true. It's just a bunch of make-believe stories. And yet, just in the last 10, 15 years, more and more discoveries are showing that the Bible is true. Of course, the way most of us have come to understand Samson is through somebody else. Who might that be? That would be Samson and Delilah. Yes. The story of Samson and Delilah has been portrayed in books and movies and repeated over and over and over. And we will cover that story in the coming weeks. But let's go back to the beginning and find out why Samson was Samson. He was born into a bad time for the Israelite people. They had repeatedly turned their backs on God, and sometimes the Israelite people had outright defied God. He was tired of it. He'd become very weary of their behavior. Over and over and over again through the Old Testament, we find the Israelites turning their back on God, and God had finally reached his last straw. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. The Philistines were the worst enemies of the Israelites. For 40 years they lived under their rule, and then God decided to give the Israelites a new leader, a new judge, and that judge was Samson. In some ways, Samson's story actually mirrors that of Jesus Christ. Samson was to be the savior of the Israelite nation, and it begins when an angel appeared to a woman, the wife of a man named Manoah. She had never been able to have children. Now listen to the words of this verse and think about how closely this resembles the angel speaking to Mary. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are barren and childless, but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son." Sounds very, very familiar. Remember, Samson was coming to be a judge, the seventh judge. He was going to be the one that was going to save the Israelite nation from the Philistines. Jesus was coming to save the Jewish people. Now, there were specific rules for this miraculous birth that were to be followed by the wife of Manoah. And they were clearly spelled out from the beginning. And this makes a huge difference in the life of Samson. These rules were not just for his mother, they were for him. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean or dead. You will become pregnant, and you will have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazarite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. This verse lays out what are called the Nazarite vows. These vows are so that someone who is not a priest, someone who is basically an ordinary person like you and me, can be set apart and used by God for his glory. Now you make these vows and you're basically saying that you're devoting yourself completely and totally to God. The vows were very simple and very clear and can actually be found in the Old Testament book of Numbers chapter 6. It lists what is included in the Nazarite vows. Don't get drunk, don't touch anything dead, and don't cut your hair. The importance of these can't be stressed enough. In fact, these vows are mentioned 3 times in chapter 13. 3 different times these vows are mentioned. Judges 13, 6 and 7. Then the woman went to her husband and told him, "A man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God, very awesome." I don't know if they said it like we would say it today, but I didn't ask him where he came from, and he didn't tell me his name. But he said to me, "You will become pregnant and have a son. Now then, drink no wine or other fermented drink, and do not eat anything unclean, because the boy will be a Nazarite of God from the womb until the day of his death." Again, sounds a lot like the story of Mary going to Joseph and trying to explain the situation with Jesus being born. Of course, you may be wondering, what's the big deal with the hair? That just seems to be so out of place with the other two, but what is the big deal about the hair? The other 2 vows make a little more sense, but the hair thing. Well, just as baptism is a sign of our commitment to God, the long hair made it obvious that Samson was a Nazarite. It's a public statement that he had made a vow to God. Samson was destined for greatness, and it showed by his hair of all things. The mark was on him. Now, we've seen people destined for greatness very early on in life. How many people know when it was that LeBron James, that they knew that he was going to be a great basketball player? When do you think it happened? Bryce, where are you? Bryce is 9 years old. Fourth grade. That is when they already knew that LeBron James was going to be a great player. His mother had him when she was 16, and it was an awful life of moving apartment to apartment in Akron, Ohio, in the seediest neighborhoods of town. And she herself also recognized greatness in her son. And she made a decision to give him up, not in adoption, but to allow him to live with the football coach of the high school there. The football coach recognized this wasn't going to be a football player, this was going to be a basketball player, and immediately got involved with AAU and other leagues in the area. So at 9 years old, LeBron James was already destined for greatness. But LeBron James is unusual in that you aren't going to find a lot of trouble surrounding his life. If you research LeBron James, there aren't a lot of stories of things he did wrong. There are little things here and there, typical youthful indiscretions, that kind of thing, but nothing major. The foundation was laid for his life when his mom made a decision to allow him to live with somebody who had a stable family life. So he's going to start off with a great start, with a great family life, and it's actually sort of been borne out by him returning to Cleveland and what he's done in terms of his decision to return to his homeland, as it were. Something changes, though, when you are destined for greatness. I'll bet LeBron James had this happen many times in his life, where when he walked into a restaurant, he got the best table, and when he left, he didn't have to pay a thing. Everything changes when you are destined for greatness. And due to his Nazarite vow, Samson was recognized as someone different. He was recognized as someone who God had destined for greatness. But I don't believe that it was because of his physical stature. When Samson is portrayed in the movies, and even the pictures that we have of him in some of the videos that we're going to watch over the next 3 weeks, he's always pictured as this huge, hulking man. When the Bible miniseries presented Samson, it presented this gigantic guy, taller and bigger and stronger than everyone. But I don't think he was as imposing physically as we may think. If you know the story of Samson and Delilah, you know that the Philistines paid Delilah to find out the secret of Samson's strength. I guess my question is, what secret? If he was walking around this big hulking guy who looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger, why would anybody question where his strength came from? It came from him, right? So why would they have to ask that question? If it was so physically obvious, then why would anyone question why Samson was so strong? Instead, they were asking, what is the secret of your strength? It was a secret. It wasn't obvious. He was much stronger than what someone would see by looking at him. So what was it that made him so strong? Well, this was another sign of God's hand on Samson. When Samson told Delilah he would lose his strength if he got a haircut, it might seem that the strength was in his hair of all things, but in reality, his strength was in God, and his supernatural strength was far beyond anything he could do on his own. Cutting his hair broke the vow with God, and therefore he lost his strength, because he cut off the supernatural strength that he got from God. So it wasn't because Samson was this big, strong guy, and he was walked down the street, and immediately everybody recognized, well, he's strong because he's strong. No. He was strong because God worked through him. So how and why did Samson go so wrong? The Samson sickness and the sickness of so many of us is pride. But it's also entitlement and lust. Two other issues we'll cover in the next few weeks. But pride is the basis of it all. When you think you can handle it, when you think you have it all together, then everything changes. When you begin to build this false sense of security around the idea that you can achieve anything on your own, that's when things go wrong. And it does lead to this feeling of entitlement. I'll bet it's very easy for somebody like LeBron James to get used to the idea when I walk into a restaurant, I am going to get the best table. Because he's special. He's different. He's destined for greatness. When that happens, everything we do revolves around us, our needs, our wants, our desires. Nothing else matters when all we think of is ourselves. And when it comes down to it, that was the biggest downfall of Samson. Judges chapter 13 closes with the birth of Samson. It's been set up. The Philistine nation has control, and God has sent a Savior. The woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson. He grew, and the Lord blessed him. The word Samson means sunshine because he was to bring sunshine to the Israelite people, and he did. But it was just a little bit of sunshine. He had so much potential, but pride got in the way, and he died a tragic death as a result. This month we're going to look at the mistakes he made and how we can learn from them. We don't have to give in to the Samson sickness. And it all begins when we put our trust in God and put our faith in Him.